Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're going to the Succah, daf lamed vav. We're going to begin on the very bottom of lamed ham base, 3 lines in the bottom, with the word niklaf. So we were learning in the Mishnah, in yesterday's daf, that when it comes to an esrog, if it is peeled, then it is possible. So Omer Rava Hayasroga, the aglid, Kahani Succah Kshera, says that if you have an esrog that is peeled, just like these Ahani Succah, Rashi says, is Tamara Aduma, right? These red dates. So he says that's going to be kosher, even though it's apparently completely peeled. Ivan on Tanan, Niklaf Pasul. The Mishnah says it's pasul. How could you say it's kosher? Well, kash, so we continue the Lamed Vav Aleph, Habakula, Habamiksasa. It depends if it's completely peeled, then it's kosher. However, if it's partially peeled, it's pasul, as Rashi says, the numer, who again it looks spotted, and therefore it doesn't look nice. Question 5a. Niklaf ha'esrog madino. So as we said, if it's completely peeled, it's okay. If it's not completely peeled, it's like partially peeled, that's pasul. Nistak nikav. So Tani Ula bar Chanina. Nikav, when we talked about an esrog which has a hole, nekav mafulish, if it is going completely through from one side to the next, it's b'mashahu, even if it's the smallest amount. V'she'ein mafulish b'ki'isr. However, if it doesn't go completely through the esrog, so then the only time it's pasul is if it is the size of a coin known as an isr. So boy Rabbi, no esrog simani treifa mahu, and this reminds me of Mesechus Chulin, which goes through in the third parak Ilotrefus. It goes through all the different dinim of what's considered to be a treifa for an animal. So we make comparisons between the treifa of an animal, a defective animal, to that of an esrog. So the Gemara wonders. So when it says Noilda be'esrog simani treifa mahu maikim boile, what is it asking? In niklaf, it's talking about a situation where, let's say, the animal's skinned. So tanina, we already learned that in our Mishnah. We just said, as a few moments ago, that if it's completely peeled, then it's kosher. Only when it's partially peeled, the miksas is a pasul. In nistak tanina. We also learned the case of nistak in our Mishnah. It's also pasul. In nikav tanina. Also, our Mishnah talked about if there's a hole. Also, it says it's pasul. So kikim aboyle kidu'ula. This statement is specifically talking about the din of ula. And before we get into that, let's look at Rashi nistak. The hainu groigris, regarding the throat of the animal, shenistak kula shalonishtayer b'chuy lamala b'chuy lamata. That the ring, it has these different chuliyos, has these different rings around the each part of the throat, and it doesn't have the chulia above or below. Nekev, Rashi says, in nekev krum shel mayach. If, let's say, the membrane of the brain of the animal has a hole in it, so then that's a problem. So he said we learn all these dinim when it comes to sukkah, and the dinim of an esrog. So Amar Rav Yochanan, this is what he's referring to. Reya, when it comes to the lungs, shenishbecha kekitain kshera, even though it is liquefied to that of a ketone, it is still ksher. Says Rashi, what does this refer to? Habasar shebatoicha krum, referring to the meat which is inside of the membrane. Nimuach benasa kamayim, it becomes disintegrated and completely liquefied, and it's like water. So the din is that it doesn't make a difference. That's still kosher. Yom Rabba v'hu dekaima simpoinha. That's provided that its organs exist. So Rashi says alma misimani treifahu. So we see that perhaps this is also the dinim. Halo kaima simpoinha treifa. If it doesn't have its major organs intact, then it's treifa. So hachamai. So when it comes to the simani treifa of an animal, specifically its lungs, the inside, it's all liquefied, it's kosher. But what's the din when it comes to the case of an esrog? If the flesh of the esrog dissolved, but the skin and the interior that holds the seeds is still intact, is it kosher? So Dilma Hasam Hudaloy Shalat Bayavira Hadabaria. When it comes to an animal, because it's not being in contact with air, therefore it'll eventually heal itself. But when it comes to the esrog, because it is in contact with air, it's going to end up spoiling, or maybe it's not a difference. And therefore, the din is, when it again comes to this esrog, where the flesh of the esrog dissolved, but the skin and the interior that holds the seeds is still intact. So Tashma, esrog tafuach, if you have an esrog which is bloated, saruach, rotten, kabosh, pickled, Rashi says, with vinegar or with mustard, shaloik, a person, Rashi says you cooked it extremely for an extensive period of time or bereitzchin, in hot water, kushi, an Ethiopian esrog, which the Mishnah already talked about, lavan if it's white, umenumar if it's spotted, pasul. Esrog kikador pasul, an esrog which has the appearance like a ball, which means it's round like a ball, is pasul. The Yeshamrim af hatiyum. Also, if the esrog is a tiyum, so Rashi says shnayim debukin yachad, like twins. They have two of them that are attached to one another. Esrog kaboiser, when it comes to a small esrog, which is kapul halavan, like that of a little bean, a white bean. Rabbi Kiva Omer pasach chamim machshirin. Gadol b'tfus. Let's say you put it into, let's say, into a bottle while it's small, and then all of a sudden, when it grows, it ends up taking upon itself the form of that which is around it. You also come in beriacheres pasul, and all of a sudden it looks like something else. It's pasul. Katani is, we still learn tafuach saruach. Now, when it comes to the case of tafuach saruach, that the din is when it comes to an esrog, all these cases are pasul. So my love tafuach mibachutz, that it is like spoiled or rotten in the outside, from the outside, v'saruach mibifnim, and it's saruach from the inside. And we see therefore it's pasul. Lo idi v'idi mibachutz. Maybe it's talking about only when it's on the outside is it problematic. Lo kasha. So why does he mention two cases? Hada tafach hafagav do sarach, hada sarach hafagav do tafach. So one is that it's rotten but not spoiled, one on the outside is spoiled but not rotten. But again, it's an iboy de lipshata. We don't really explain what the din is when it comes to if there's a problem in the inside. Omer Mar, Esr Kushi Pasul. So we said that when it comes to an Esr Kushi, it's Pasul. Abasani Kushi is kosher. It's only Daimel Kushi Pasul. Only when it has the appearance of a Kushi Esrog is it Pasul. So Rabbi Ki Tananami Masnisin Dumil Kushi Tanan. When we mention this, it's Dumil Kushi. That's when it's considered to be Pasul. You're right. If it is Mamish Kushi, then it's kosher. Says Rashi, Daimel Kushi Shegadol Kan. It grew there, Varihu Shachar, and it's black. So in that situation, it's pasul. Shinidama, says Rashi, who counterfeit. So very cool Rashi. Counterfeit. Balaz. It looks like it's not real. Abu Kushi Atzmo, Hainu Tam de Kasher de Orchehu. However, in Kush, using such an esrog, that's what they're used to, and therefore it's not a problem. Rav Omer Kasha Halon. As we have this answer in so many places in Shas, it depends if you're in Eretz Yisrael or you're in Babel. Says Rashi, Masnisin live in Eretz Yisrael, Shirachaykim Eretz Kush. Those who live in Eretz Yisrael live far away from Kush. The Einim Regilim Behem, they're not accustomed to see it, and therefore it's a problem. Brais live in a Babel, Shekrayim Kush Regilim Behem, and since it's Rogel for them to see it, therefore it's not a problem. Says Rashi, Mikol Malkum, nonetheless, Begadol Kan Bedaimel Kushi. Nidmahu upasul. Okay. Esrog haboitzer b'kiba poiser b'chamachshir. So machlokas the small esrog. So Omer Rabba, Rabbi Kiva, Rav Shimon, Omer Deber Echad. Rabbi Akiva, who said that it's possible the small esrog, says the same thing as Rav Shimon. Rabbi Akiva had Amar, Rav Shimon Mahi. Where do we see Rav Shimon Shita? Titan. Rav Shimon Paiter es esrogim bekutnan. Rav Shimon patters these esrogim when they are of small size. Now, what is this referring to? So Rashi says, Rabbi Akiva the Amar the ad gemar bishula, until it's complete, we'll have the esrog pri. It's not a fruit. Rabbi Shimon Amar deber echad, he also says the same thing when it comes to being pater. Rashi says min ha-maisers. You're going to be pater from meiser because it's too small. So Amalei Abaya Dimalohi ad kan loy kam Rabbi Akiva hacha to be in and hadabaleka. Maybe the whole reason why he says this din that boiter is not good enough because it's not hadar, it's not beautiful. Avol hasam k'rabbanan severely. Maybe he holds like the rabbanan that taka you or chayv and meiser. Yinam yad kan loy kam Rabbi Shimon hasam el dechsiv aser taser es kol tibu asarecha. It says regarding the din of meiser, it's exerts a custom k'derech shebnei adam meitim l'zriya. It's a time when a person will typically harvest these fruits, which is only when it's gemar peri, and therefore since it's done before this time, so it's going to be pater from meiser. Avol hacha k'rabbanan severely, and we end off v'sulo midi. There's no other way of answering this. So let me see what it said. I wrote on the side. Any small pri, everyone agrees you don't need to bring meiser since it is not an oichel. Small. I can't read this. Everyone says you're a chayiv. Okay, I have to look into this. Look at this Rashi a little bit better. K'rabbanan severely the chayiv of a meiser the prihu hoyel b'tchilasin the seif and oichel. So the beginning and end, it is for eating. Shemini adam meitzim l'zriya pri oisel l'smayach. It's meant to be to come up. But v'shkachas l'ela b'bashel kol tzarchay. Again, it's only when it's something which is completely ripened. Weiter. Lamid vav umid beis. V'sulamidi. Godel b'tfus v'asu kimin b'riacheres posel. So again, like you stuck this esrog when it's small in something, and because it grows into the form of a bottle or whatever it is, and you crack it open, so it's not kosher. Amarav loshan elokim beriacheres, only if it looks like something else. But kibriyasu kosher, if it still has the form of an esrog, it's kosher. Pshita, that's what it says. So kimin beriacheres tanan. What's sricha? Really, it's Tanya. It's not a mission that we quoted. We quoted Brisa. So kimin beriacheres Tanya. So it's sricha diavida dapi dapi. So what does that mean? You mean dafi dapi. So it is comparable, as Rashi says, kimin gilgul shel richayim shel mayim, like a water well which has all these like different pokes coming out of it, or spokes coming out of it. So in that case, it looks again like this water wheel from a water mill, and the chiddush is that whether or not that is something which is kosher or possible. So what does that mean? If it's duffy, is that good or not good? So let's see Rashi. Kamin krushim ki ein gilgul shel rechaim shel mayim. Again, this water well. V'rabba ashminan duhunami briyasai. Right, it's an important line of Rashi that this is Rabbi saying that is also briyasai, and therefore this is actually kosher. Okay. Itmar esrog shit nikvuhu akbarim. So let's say, unfortunately, you bought a beautiful, expensive esrog, all of a sudden a bunch of mice started attacking it, and they bit into it. So Omarav ein zeh hadar, it's not hadar, which is another way of saying that this is cannot be used. Eini, it's not so. Rav Chanina matbu ba v'nafik ba. We know Rav Chanina actually dipped his esrog into something, which means he actually cut open and cut part of his esrog, and he ate it. The question is, what do you mean? How can he have done that? The Mishnah says explicitly, as Rashi tells us, chaser kol shu pasul, that if you have an esrog that's missing anything, then it's pasul. So how could he have cut it and then still used it for his esrog? So bishul mamasnisa in the Rav Chanina l'kasha kan be after rishon, kan be after sheni. Maybe the only time it has to be complete is dafka in a situation where it's the first day of Yom Tov. As the pasuk says, "L'kachtem l'kichatama," it has to be on the first day. L'kachtem l'chem b'yom rishon. The first day it has to be complete. However, Yom Tov sheni nafik bay, and he was yaitza with it only on the second day. So even though it wasn't shalim, because the obligation of being complete is dafka on the first day. Ella L'Rav Kasha, but nonetheless we still have a Kasha. Says Rashi, Dimer Ein Zeh Hadar. He says this is not Hadar. So how could he have done this? L'chayra, there's an Isser, a requirement of Hadar, according to this, even on Yom Tov Sheni. There's no chiluk. So Amar Rav Shani Achbarim Demisi. It's very funny language. Different are an achbar, a mouse, because they are mayas. A mouse is mius. Very interesting translation. Achbarim Demisi. So in other words, when it comes to a mouse biting into it, even on Yom Tov Sheni, it's not good because that's disgusting. However, you cut a little piece off of it, that's not necessarily a chisaron of hadar. This is beautiful. The Harav Chanina matbel b'manafik, but it's still considered hadar. Harav Chanina kasha mastis and kasha kam Yom Rishon kam Yom Tov Sheni. And Yom Tov Rishon it has to be l'kachna b'chem tam, it has to be complete. However, Yom Tov Sheni it can even be pieces. Okay. Esrog katan. So we had a machlokas about the small size of the esrog. So Amar Rav from Bar Papa. Interestingly enough, kamachlokas kan kach machlokas ba'avonim mikur zois. So too is the same machlokas about the size of the use of stones on Shabbos, which typically are muksam makmaskufa. A person's not allowed to touch these stones, but because they're being used like kinuach, Rashi says, to wipe oneself, who's relieving themselves of the basic kisei. So the dinim is you're allowed to use a certain amount of stones, but after a certain amount is not required, and therefore it's muksa. B'Shabbos gimel avanim mikur zolos mutal hachnas v'basic kisei. You can bring in 3 stones into the bathroom. The kamashir, how big are these stones? So Rashi says, bigger than that, it's not fit. Again, it's an interesting shaila. What does one have to do with the other? Lav Dafka does it. It's just the fact that as a siman bialma that we can remember that they have the same shiurim. So the question is, if an esrog has to be only big enough that 2 can hold in one hand, or even so large that 2 in one hand, or one in 2 hands. Tanya Amrav Yosi Masri Rabbi Kiva Shabola Beisach Neses. He went to the shul. The esrogish al seifel was so big, like a watermelon. He was carrying it on his shoulder. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Raya Afheim Amrulo Ein Zeh Hadar. Even this is not hadar. So not too big, not too small, kind of just right, as we know in other stories. That's how it goes. We're going to stop there because we'll continue with that next Mishnah, which will end up, if I continue the next Gemara, it's going to cover a major piece. So let's see perhaps another couple questions, and then we'll stop. Eser Kakushi Madinoi. So we already talked about the niklaf. That's how we began. It was peeled completely. It's kosher, partially possible. Eser Kakushi. So we had a couple of answers. One possible explanation, this is 5b, is im godu b'makom, if it grows in a place the lab urchayhu, that's not the normal way for it to grow in this color, puzzle. B'makom dahainu urchi kosher. So it's really both terutzim, and again, whether or not you're in Eretz Yisrael, which is far away, or Babel, you're closer, so you're more used to perhaps seeing those particular colors. Esrog, question 6, shenakvu akbarim, that mice got a hold onto it. Mandinu mas stadim b'zeh. What's the din? So b'yom tov rishon, it's definitely possible to be in the lekicha tam leika. It's definitely possible because it's missing something. Even cutting it out nicely with a knife is not acceptable. On the second day, it's plukta imoyis, if it's repulsive, v'lav hadarhu, o the lo gara mikol chaser de kosher b'sheni. Maybe it's not any different than anything else, and therefore it would be actually allowed on the second day. Question is, do you consider the bitings repulsive? Question TA 16. Which we just saw. Let's see if maybe the question is written a little bit, answers a little bit differently. 16. So he says, B'yom tov rishon, yafshir, definitely not. B'yom tov sheni, plugta the trei lishni begemara, the libet rav, the ayin perish Rashi, the mashma, the lokasha puzzle af b'diavad. That when he says it's puzzle, it means it's puzzle even b'diavad. TB17. Nekev, almost the exact same questions here. Nekev she'ein bo chisaron, a hole which is not missing. He impossible be'esroi. So he says a nikiv nekim mafulish. That's only if it goes directly through the esrog, which is how we began on Amud Aleph. However, Eino mafulish, if it doesn't go through, behu isser puzzle. It's only when it's the size of an isser will it be puzzle. Adkan.